What would you do if a forgotten letter from your past revealed a heartbreaking secret? Watch the video and enjoy my new story. I sat in my office, staring at the letter in front of me. It had been 3 years since Andrew's death, and I hadn't known. I hadn't known that the person I once considered my best friend had passed away, and now here I was holding the invitation to his funeral in my hands like some cruel joke from the past. The envelope was yellowed with age, the paper inside worn at the edges as though it had been forgotten in some dusty corner. I had found it buried beneath a pile of old files, hidden away like it had been waiting for me to open it, to remember. The date on the letter was clear, though. 3 years ago, nearly to the day. I stared at the words, my mind still struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. You're invited to the funeral of Andrew Carter. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Andrew, the same Andrew who had been my best friend for as long as I could remember. We'd grown up together in a small town, shared everything, dreams, laughter, fights, and the kind of bond that only childhood friends could know. But somewhere along the way, life had pulled us in different directions. I closed my eyes, the memories rushing back. Andrew and I were inseparable in our early years. We'd spent summers riding bikes down the narrow streets of our town, sneaking into abandoned houses and talking about everything and nothing. He was always the quieter one, steady, reliable, while I had been the one who dreamed bigger, reaching for something outside the confines of our small world. But after high school, things changed. I went off to college, determined to build a future for myself in the city, while Andrew stayed behind, working as a mechanic at his father's shop. We drifted apart slowly, and when I finally returned home for the first time after graduation, the distance between us was more than just physical. It was like we'd been living in different realities for years. We tried to reconnect, of course. I'd call him now and then, but our conversations felt strained, like we were both too different, too far removed from the boys we used to be. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. I had my life in the city, and he had his job in the shop. We were just strangers with a history. But now, as I held the letter, I realized how much I had taken for granted. The years that had passed without me checking on him, without making an effort to bridge the gap, and now it was too late. He was gone, and I hadn't even known he was sick. I pushed the letter away, my thoughts swirling. What had happened? Why hadn't I known? It wasn't like Andrew to keep things from me, but then again, maybe it was. Maybe he had always been good at hiding the hard stuff. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. "Daniel," John's voice answered, groggy, probably just waking up. "I need you to look into something for me," I said, my voice tight. "I need to know about Andrew Carter's family, his wife, his kids, anything you can find." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Just get me the information, John. Don't ask questions." Another pause then. "Fine, I'll get started on it, but you'll owe me one." I hung up without another word. My mind was still racing, piecing together the fragments of the past, trying to make sense of it all. Hours later, my lawyer called back with the information. "Daniel, I've got some details for you," John said. "Andrew's wife is named Lila Carter. They've got a daughter, Maddie. The thing is, it doesn't look like they're doing well. They're barely scraping by, Daniel. Lila's been struggling financially ever since Andrew got sick. He hadn't been able to work for months before his death. I'm talking about a pretty bad situation here. Medical bills piling up, debts, you name it." I felt the sting of those words, my chest tightening. This wasn't what I had expected. I hadn't known that Andrew's family was in such trouble. He'd never mentioned a word about it, not once. "You need to help them," John continued. "You've got the means to do it. You could fix their situation in a heartbeat." "I know," I said quietly. I wasn't sure why, but hearing those words, "fix their situation," stirred something inside me. I sat back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. Andrew had never asked for help. In fact, he'd always been the one to help others, especially me. I had assumed he was fine, that everything was going well for him. But now I understood how wrong I had been. Lila and Maddie, his family, were struggling, and I hadn't even known. I stood up, my mind made up. It was time to make things right. I couldn't undo the past, but I could make sure Andrew's family didn't have to suffer because of my ignorance. The next day, I made arrangements to meet Lila. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them go through this alone. The past couldn't be changed, but I could change their future. I just hoped I could prove to Lila that I wasn't just another wealthy stranger looking for a way to feel good about himself. I hoped she would see me for who I really was, someone who owed it to Andrew and to them to step in. As I walked out of my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be harder than I imagined. But it was the only path I could take now, and I was going to make it count. Tracking down Lila was easy. Money makes things like this happen. But I wasn't prepared for the way she slammed the door in my face when I introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Daniel Ashcroft," I said, holding out my hand, trying to sound casual despite the weight of the situation. She took one look at me, her hazel eyes narrowing with suspicion, before shaking her head. "I don't have time for this," she said, her voice sharp. "Goodbye." I barely had time to register what had just happened before the door clicked shut in my face. I stood there for a second, dumbfounded. Did I just get rejected by a woman I didn't even know? I could feel the breeze against my suit and the sting of her dismissal. I wasn't used to this. Usually, people at least pretended to listen. I sighed and took a step back. Maybe it was the suit, or maybe she just didn't want anything to do with someone like me. I could respect that, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. The next day I returned. This time I didn't ring the bell. Instead, I stood by the side of the house and waited for her to come outside. I wasn't about to be brushed off again. When she did step onto the porch, she was holding a basket of laundry. She caught sight of me standing there, and her brow furrowed. "Really? You're still here?" Lila's tone was half annoyed, half incredulous. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She exhaled sharply and set the basket down on the porch railing. "We already talked. I told you to go." "I know, but I didn't explain myself. Please just give me 5 minutes." Her eyes narrowed again, clearly debating whether or not to listen to me. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but you get 5 minutes and no funny business, got it?" "Funny business?" I blinked. "You think I'm here to... what? Make a deal?" "I don't know," she snapped. "You're a billionaire, and I'm supposed to just trust you. People like you always want something. Usually, something I don't have time to give." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her point. "Fair, but I'm not here to take anything from you, Lila. I'm here because I found out about Andrew, and I want to help. I know it's late, but you don't have to do this alone." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her gaze softened, but she still didn't seem entirely convinced. "You're the one who couldn't be bothered to check up on us until now? And you think a couple of checks are going to fix everything?" I shrugged. "No, I don't. I'm not offering you money. I'm offering you a job." Her eyebrows shot up. "A job? From you? As what, a personal assistant?" "More like a right-hand woman," I said, trying to keep it light, though I was starting to feel the weight of her suspicion. She tilted her head, clearly intrigued but still wary. "I've already got a job, and I'm not interested in becoming anyone's charity case." "I'm not trying to make you one," I said quickly. "But if you'd take a chance on me, maybe I could make things easier. You could do something you're good at. You don't have to worry about where the next paycheck's coming from. You just..." She raised a hand to stop me. "I don't need your charity, Daniel. I've worked hard to get here. I've managed just fine, and I'll keep doing it on my own. So, thank you, but no thank you." I didn't push further. I could see the walls she'd built up around herself, but I wasn't ready to walk away. "All right, but at least let me meet Maddie. I'm sure she's wondering who's been knocking on her mother's door all day." Lila's expression flickered for a moment. Was it surprise? Regret? Then, just as quickly, her face hardened again. "Fine," she said, sighing, "but you're wasting your time." Lila led me into the small, cluttered house. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed luxury. The walls were lined with family photos, and there were unfinished projects piled up on every surface. As we passed through the living room, I caught sight of a little girl sitting on the floor, drawing something on a sheet of paper. The girl looked up, her big brown eyes locking onto mine. "Mom?" she asked, her voice tentative, as though she wasn't sure if it was okay to speak to a stranger. "Come here, Maddie," Lila said softly. "This is Daniel. He's an old friend of your dad's. Maddie blinked at me, sizing me up in a way that made me feel more nervous than I expected. Then, without warning, she stood up, her stuffed rabbit trailing behind her. "Are you a superhero?" she asked, her voice filled with the pure curiosity that only a child's questions could carry. I glanced at Lila, who was looking anywhere but at me. "Well, I'm definitely not a superhero," I said with a smile, crouching down to her level. "But I do like to think I'm good at solving problems." Maddie studied me for a long moment before giving me a slow nod. "You can help Mommy?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. "I can," I said, my heart tightening. It was the first time anyone had asked me for anything in a way that didn't feel transactional. Lila didn't say anything, but I could tell the weight of my words had hit her. "You're really good at talking to people, aren't you?" Lila said after a pause, her arms still crossed, though her tone was softer now. I chuckled. "Not always, but when it's important, I guess I try." She stared at me for a long moment. "You don't know anything about us, Daniel. You don't understand how hard it is to let someone else in. Not when you've had to be strong for so long." I nodded, swallowing the growing lump in my throat. "I get it, and I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but I want to help, if you'll let me." She glanced down at Maddie, who was now tugging on her sleeve, and then back at me. For the first time, she didn't look like she was preparing for a fight. "I'm not sure I can," Lila murmured, almost to herself. "But maybe we can give it a shot." That was the first crack in the walls she'd built. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Lila threw herself into the job with the precision of someone who'd been juggling chaos for years. She kept my schedule tight, argued with me over unnecessary meetings, and somehow managed to make me laugh at the most inconvenient times. And then there was Maddie. She became a fixture in my office, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand while she peppered me with questions. "Why don't you have a family?" Maddie asked one afternoon, her big brown eyes watching me intently. I hesitated, glancing at Lila, who was pretending not to listen. "I'm very busy," Maddie wrinkled her nose. "That's a silly reason." "Out of the mouths of babes," Lila muttered under her breath, smirking when I shot her a look. It wasn't long before I started looking forward to those moments. Lila's dry humor, Maddie's unfiltered honesty, the warmth they brought into my otherwise sterile life. Lila was a puzzle, fiercely independent, maddeningly stubborn, and yet kind. Maddie's laughter was contagious, but Lila's smile, that was rare. And when it appeared, it was like seeing the sun for the first time after years of rain. One night, after Maddie had fallen asleep on the office couch, Lila and I shared a quiet moment. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice soft but guarded. "Because I owe it to Andrew," I said honestly, "and because I want to." She looked at me then, her walls cracking just a little. "You're a hard man to figure out, Daniel." "Good," I replied. "I'd hate to be predictable." She laughed, a soft, unexpected sound, and I felt something shift between us. Just as things started to feel comfortable, I made a mistake. A big one. Lila found out about the trust fund I'd set up for Maddie. I'd meant it as a gesture of security, but to her it was an insult. "You think you can just buy our future?" she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "It's not like that," I tried to explain. "I just wanted to help." "I didn't ask for your help, Daniel. I asked for a job. I wanted to stand on my own, not be another line item in your charity ledger." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. She quit the next day. For days, my office felt empty. Maddie's laughter was gone, and so was Lila's sharp wit. I'd thought I was helping, but I'd only pushed her away. It hit me then. This wasn't about Andrew anymore. It wasn't even about guilt. It was about Lila and Maddie. They weren't just a responsibility. They were my future. I found them in a park, Maddie bundled up in a coat too big for her, swinging high while Lila watched from a bench. "I screwed up," I said, sitting beside her. "Yeah, you did," she replied, but her voice was softer this time. "I wasn't trying to control you," I said. I want you and Maddie in my life. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, because I love you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I'd said too much. Then she smiled, a real breathtaking smile, and took my hand. "You're a lot of work, Daniel Ashcroft," she said. "Good," I replied, grinning. "I'd hate to be predictable." Maddie ran over then, dragging her rabbit and demanding we all go get ice cream. As Lila laughed and Maddie tugged us both toward the car, I realized I finally had what I'd been searching for: a family.